You're listening to the second season of Breakdown, an exclusive podcast by the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. This season, death in a hot car, mistake or murder. Go to ajcbreakdown.com for additional background, photos, video, and more on the Justin Ross Harris case.
Previously on Breakdown.
You didn't find anything like that in your investigation in this case?
Besides the actual death?
You know what I'm asking about.
No, I don't. Can you please be clear on your question?
And as a matter of fact, on the 18th, through these applications, in particular what we've been talking about the past 2 days, Whisper and Kick, he added to the filth on the 18th, didn't he?
Yes, sir.
Okay. On the 18th, on that Kick app, which he did not delete from his phone, he had all kind of communications with other women that morning and throughout the day, including the exchange of sexual images.
Yes, sir.
The fact of the matter is, you were dead wrong about Leanna Harris. She's in no way involved in any sort of conspiracy with her husband, is she?
And that's been answered. She is not a suspect involved in an investigation at this time.
Isn't it true you're looking for a conspiracy and you're looking for nefarious motive?
All week, the jury heard that Ross Harris would talk to anyone, that he loved to be the center of attention, that he tried to dominate just about every conversation. But in the end, Harris had nothing to say. The hot car murder trial limped toward a conclusion on Friday without the jury hearing from the defendant. The case will probably go to the jury on or just before Election Day. This means it's possible we may have two verdicts on Tuesday: Clinton or Trump for president, guilty or innocent for Harris. I'm Bill Rankin, legal affairs reporter for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. I started covering the hot car murder trial in April, sitting through 3 grueling weeks of jury selection in a Cobb County courtroom. Then, Judge Mary Staley Clark granted the change of venue, moving the case here to Brunswick and the Golden Isles. We've now had 21 days of testimony, 52 witnesses for the state, 18 for the defense. And on Friday, both the prosecution and the defense rested their cases. Harris ended all suspense Friday morning as to whether he would testify. After the defense presented its only witness of the morning, lead attorney Maddox Kilgore told the judge the attorneys wanted to confer with their client. 10 minutes later, the defense team emerged from their talk with Harris. Kilgore then announced the news to Staley Clark.
Judge, we're not going to call any more witnesses, so we can go ahead and put on the record now, or I'll go ahead and put on the record now, that Mr. Harris is going to waive his right to testify. I know this has been a longer trial than what we usually have, and so the court, I'm sure, wants to be particularly clear on this matter for the record. I don't think I can make it any clearer. He's aware of his right. He wants to waive it. He does not want to testify in the trial of this case.
Staley Clark said she wanted to hear from Harris herself.
It's been stated to me that you would like not to testify at this time.
That is correct, yes, ma'am.
And was that your opinion and what you wanted to do when it was stated to the court?
Yes, ma'am.
Is it still your opinion?
Yes, ma'am.
Do you need any further time or any further opportunity to consider this?
No, ma'am, I don't.
So you're satisfied with the decision that it's made and it's final and you're ready to move forward?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Have a seat.
Thank you.
So, we didn't get to hear from Harris on the stand. But early in the week, we did hear from someone who could prove to be a pivotal witness in the trial. On Monday morning, defense attorney Kilgore delivered on his promise he made during opening statements. If the state doesn't call her, we will.
Are you Leanna Taylor?
I am.
All right, did you used to be Leanna Harris?
I did.
Are you Cooper's mom?
I am.
As you'll remember, the police initially suspected that Leanna had something to do with Cooper's death. They thought she was too stoic, perhaps even unfeeling, on the day Cooper died. When she spoke at his funeral, she didn't shed a tear. But it took only one question from Kilgore to break Leanna in court. He asked her to tell the jury about her little boy.
Cooper was the sweetest little boy. He had so much life in him. He was everything to me. He loved to smile. He loved to play. He would talk to and smile at anybody. It didn't matter if it was a stranger or not. He loved to play with cars. He was really fascinated by trucks and cars, and he was so even-tempered. Just everything about him was just very laid back, very chill, very go with the flow. And he was just amazing. I mean, I miss him so much.
Harris broke down crying when his former wife said those words. In fact, for almost all of Leanna's testimony, Harris wouldn't look at her on the witness stand. Instead, he kept his gaze down on the defense table, as if he were ashamed. And of course, he should have been. So here we have the woman whose life was ruined by Harris. He not only left their only child to die in his overheated SUV, he cheated on her over and over again and engaged in graphic sexting with an untold number of women, underage girls, even men. You'd think she'd be the last person on earth to testify for her ex-husband, to testify for the defense. But that she did, and Leanna had a lot to say. Perhaps the most important part of her testimony came when she testified why she had to be a rock of support for her husband when she finally met him at police headquarters the night of Cooper's death.
I knew I needed to be strong for him. I knew that he was never going to forgive himself. I knew that this was something that wasn't done purposefully. I just
Objection, Judge. Commenting on intent.
Sustained.
Lead prosecutor Chuck Boring objected, and, as has often been the case, Judge Staley Clark sustained it. But for Harris's legal team, it was mission accomplished. They got Leanna to say the words they wanted the jury to hear. Leanna testified Harris was quite involved in his son's life. He was home just about every night. He shared feeding, diaper changing, and bath time. He'd play his guitar for Cooper, read books to him, pull out some toys, and race around the house with him. At home, Leanna and Ross were a team, she said. They shared all the duties required for managing a household. And they went on hikes. They went to Braves games. They enjoyed each other's company.
When I think of things that we did together and we enjoyed together.
She described her husband as gregarious, self-confident, someone who loved to be the center of attention. He'd strike up a conversation with almost anyone. She also said, scoring another point for the defense, that he was easily distracted. Leanna worked as a dietitian. Their goal, she said, was to her to be a stay-at-home mom by the time they had a second child. But there were problems with their marriage, she said.
The way that I would group our problems would be intimacy, problems sexually related. As far as how we got along and how we managed our home and co-parented, everything was very normal. I mean, we didn't fight a lot. We didn't have issues in that aspect. It all came back to the sexual. There was just no sexual relationship. It was very forced. It was very difficult to engage in that with each other. Just a lot of loss in intimacy.
2 years into their marriage and 4 years before the birth of Cooper, Harris owned up to a problem.
We were married in 2006. The first thing that kind of came up was in 2008. I came home from work one day and he told me that he had a problem with pornography. He had been talking to a friend of his that day, discussing the issue, and he decided to confess that to me that day. At that time, it wasn't something that, it shocked me, but it wasn't like, I didn't think it was a huge issue. I guess I underestimated the problem. We didn't do any kind of counseling then, didn't seek help. Basically, it was just understanding I'm going to get this under control and, it'll be okay.
Then, 2 years later, there was another disturbing discovery.
But around 2010, I found a message on his phone that I guess you would describe it as sexting. I didn't see it in that way then. It wasn't something that I had a lot of knowledge of. But the message was, something along the lines of, show me your boobs.
Did you confront him?
Yes, right then and there.
All right.
That was probably one of our more vivid fights that I can remember. I went into the bathroom, I shut myself in the bathroom, and I asked him to leave. And he wouldn't leave. He wouldn't leave me. He didn't want to leave me.
Leanna and her husband met with their pastor. Harris agreed to have his home computer hooked up to something called Covenant Eyes. That's an internet accountability program that monitors websites that are visited. Go to some porn site and an accountability partner is notified. Still, the couple's intimacy problems continued.
Somewhere between 2008 and 2010, we started having issues with erectile dysfunction, inability to perform, and it was just difficult. My reaction to that wasn't very good. Of course, my first thought is, it's me. There's something wrong with me. He's not attracted to me. And my reaction was not very good. I would get upset, I would cry, and it did a lot of damage to our ability to connect intimately, in my opinion.
They tried sex therapy. Ross saw a doctor. He was treated for low testosterone. But then, in the fall of 2013, Leanna found another incriminating text on her husband's phone.
I picked up his phone, and it was a very similar situation as last time. Just, wanted to get a read on the time. We were getting ready to go to dinner. His brother and his wife were there. We had a babysitter coming to watch Cooper, and we were going to go to dinner. Picked up his phone and clicked it on, and a message automatically popped up. It wasn't sexual in any way, but I could just tell that it was from a female. I can't remember the exact word, but it used something like, I know hun, or I know babe, or something like that. And I knew it wasn't from a guy friend. They don't talk to each other like that. And so I exploded. I was very angry. I confronted him immediately. I said, we're not going anywhere. You need to go tell your brother why we're not going. You need to go in that room right now and you tell him.
Kilgore then asked Leanna what she did next.
Did you want to work it out and save your marriage?
Yes. I texted our counselor that night and basically said, we need an emergency session. We need to talk this through.
At this time, of course, Leanna had no idea what her husband had been up to.
Through your marriage, did you know that Ross was sending nude photos of his genitals to women?
No, I did not.
Did you know that Ross was had engaged in meeting a woman at a park to have fellatio in his car?
No, I did not.
Did you know that Ross had more than one woman come into your home to engage in sexual acts with him?
No.
Did you know that he would spend time during the day on the telephone talking to various women?
No.
Did you know that he would actually express love for other women?
No.
Did you know that he had engaged in sexual acts with a prostitute?
No, and if I had, I would have divorced him then. I would have left.
What if you'd known about any of this stuff?
I would have left. We would have separated. I don't think it would have been able to be, it wouldn't have been able to be undone.
Even though she didn't know all that, Leanna said she asked Ross a question after finding that last incriminating text in 2013.
It didn't come from a fight. I just very bluntly one night said, do you want a divorce? If you want a divorce, you can have it. I will give it to you, if that's what you want. And I believe his answer back to me was, that's the last thing I want. I do not want that.
Did you give him an easy out to the marriage if he wanted it?
Yes, I did.
Score another one for the defense. Throughout this trial, the prosecution has contended Harris deliberately killed Cooper so he could be free of his marriage and sleep with as many people as possible. Here, Leanna was giving him just the out he needed, and he declined. Kilgore then walked Leanna through that fateful day, the last day of Cooper's life. She said when she went to pick him up, she walked into Little Apron Daycare just like any other day.
And I went ahead back to his room and opened the door and started looking around for him because he would normally be playing. The teacher that was there, she looked at me and she said, what are you doing here? I said, I'm here to get Cooper, and I'm just looking around for him. And she said, well, Cooper's not here. I didn't understand. I thought she was joking. She said, he didn't come today. And I just kind of went into a panic. I didn't know what to do. I left the room. I ran down to the front desk.
Leanna said she told the guy at the front desk, whom she identified as Terrell, that she couldn't find Cooper.
I was starting to lose my ability to understand what was going on. It didn't make sense. Cooper was supposed to be at daycare. I was supposed to be the one to pick him up. It didn't make sense. The only thing that made sense to me, based on everything that I knew that day, Ross must have left him in the car. That was the only thing that made sense. It was the only thing that clicked in my mind as even a remote possibility. He was never checked in. If he was never checked in, then he must have forgot. So I told him, I said, I want to go over to where Ross works and I want to find his car. I didn't know how they were going to the movie. I didn't know if they were going to carpool. I didn't know if they were going to meet. I wanted to get to where I knew Ross could possibly be. I tried to call him. I couldn't get him on the phone.
The staff at Little Apron wanted her to stay there, but Leanna would have none of it. She needed to find her son and her husband. She went to Harris's workplace at Home Depot, looked for his car in the parking lot, but she couldn't find it. Her cell phone was dying, so she went back and forth to her car to charge it and continued to call Ross, who wasn't picking up. She returned to the office building and found Terrell and another security guard there, looking at a TV screen on the wall. She didn't see what was on and noticed they quickly turned it off when she arrived.
In my mind, I was thinking, everything's fine. This is not that it's fine, but I was in complete denial about the situation. And I was actually looking at my phone, trying to figure out how to call the police, because there's nothing I've had to do before. Trying to figure out what I would do, what I would say, and my phone rang, and it was a detective. They told me to stay where I was, that they were going to come to me. Yes. I said, will you please just tell me what's wrong? I know something's wrong. And they said, no. And I said, well, it's bad, isn't it? And he said, yeah, it's bad. We're coming there, just stay there.
She said she then confronted Terrell. You know what's going on, don't you? She asked.
And he said, well, do you want me to tell you? And I think I made the comment, like, what does it matter if you tell me or guys that I don't know come tell me what's wrong? I said, do you know what's wrong? And he said, all I know is that they said that a child had died, and it was Ross's car on the news. He said, that's all I know.
Soon enough, the detectives arrived. They took her into a conference room and confirmed to her that Cooper was dead. Then, Leanna said, she felt like she was having an out-of-body experience.
It was like another person took over my body. It was like I wasn't even there. I couldn't understand. It wasn't real. Sometimes it still doesn't feel real.
Were you able to cry when you were talking to the detectives?
No. I wasn't, and I didn't understand why. They just told me this, and I can't even cry, and I didn't understand why.
The detectives then took her to police headquarters.
I felt like I was in a dream, and so during that time, I kept going back and forth between praying, please God, don't let this be true. Just let me wake up. Just don't let this be true. This isn't happening. This can't be happening. And I knew at some point I was going to get to see Ross.
Leanna acknowledged that she has watched the video recording of her meeting with Harris.
I don't right or not.
Okay.
I did not recognize who that was myself. I did not know that you could react in the way that I reacted. I didn't, it was like somebody else took over my body for me. While I was outside of my mind trying to make sense of what was happening, it was like somebody else took over and just got me through each step of the way. I didn't recognize myself. I didn't recognize my voice, my mannerisms. Everything was foreign when I went back and watched that.
When she did, she saw herself asking her husband a question that has bedeviled them both ever since. When this question was revealed in the probable cause hearing 2 weeks after Cooper's death, it led many to believe Leanna was involved. So now, Kilgore asked, "Do you recall asking Ross, did you say too much?"
I did.
Okay. Do you have any recollection of saying that?
I do. It's one of the things that stands out more. There's, like I said, there's some things that stand out. There's some things that don't. I know how Ross responds to people, especially people that he doesn't know. He talks a lot, even if he doesn't have anything to say. And I couldn't understand what was happening. I didn't understand why he was being charged. I didn't understand the actions that were being taken. And the only thing that I could think in my head was, what did you say? And so those words came out.
With her husband in custody on murder charges, Leanna said she headed back home. One of Cooper's teachers had hung around the police station to give her a ride.
What'd you do when you got home?
I didn't want to go in my home. It was like I knew that if I went through the door, that it would be real. And I didn't want it to be real. So I sat down on the sidewalk outside and just sat there, and I said, I don't want to go inside. And we finally went inside, and I walked back through the living room and through the kitchen, through the hallway, and back to Cooper's room, and I just got in his bed and I just cried. I finally was able to cry.
Before court adjourned Monday, Kilgore displayed on a large monitor dozens of family photos. It started with an image of the ultrasound showing Cooper inside Leanna's womb. There were photos of a beaming Harris holding his son not long after his birth. There's Cooper dressed up as Batman for his first Halloween, his first Christmas at his grandparents' home in Tuscaloosa, at a Braves game, at the pool, at the beach, all curled up sound asleep on his dad's belly or next to him in bed. Leanna wiped tears as she watched one after the other. Harris often covered his eyes. Kilgore then played a few videos of the family. There was Cooper eating a banana. There he was, falling asleep in his high chair while eating a grilled cheese sandwich. Here's Kilgore playing one video that shows Ross getting Cooper to pronounce some words after him.
Oh, no. I know.
All right. So is that at home in y'all's bed?
It is.
Then there's a video of father and son, sitting face to face on the bed. Ross has his guitar and strums it to Cooper's delight. Then he asks his son to play. The little boy excitedly gives it his best shot before his father continues strumming again.
You do it. Go.
Did you hear that laughter in the background? Those were some of the jurors, chuckling. You know you've accomplished something if you get jurors to laugh out loud during a hot murder trial involving the death of a child. Kilgore ended his direct examination with a single question.
Leanna, did Ross love this little boy?
Yes, he did. very much.
That's all I have.
I started wondering about halfway through Leanna's testimony how Prosecutor Boring was going to handle the cross-examination. Here was a mother whose son had died in the most horrific way. Here also was a woman who was clearly hostile to the state's case. Boring started off by asking Leanna some obvious questions. He was trying to make his point, what she knew and didn't know. You didn't know what the defendant was doing during the day, did you? You don't know he was sexting to people online. You didn't know what he was doing driving from Chick-fil-A to his office parking lot. You don't know what he was doing in the 30 seconds before he got out of the car, or when he returned to the SUV at lunchtime and threw the light bulbs inside. You didn't see him in the interview room talking to the detectives. Of course, Leanna said no. The exchange that follows is a good example of how Boring couldn't seem to rattle Leanna at all. It also shows her strange loyalty to her ex-husband.
And there's no doubt that the defendant could see Cooper's driver's seat of that Tucson, correct?
I don't know what Ross could see.
Well, we know that he told you he's driving down the road to Acres Mill and he turns his head to change lanes and he sees Cooper, correct?
When he turned around, yes.
Yes, when he turned to the side, to his right, correct?
When he turned to change lanes, so he would have been looking behind him.
Correct. And so he turned right, child's right there, you can see him if you're looking back right there, correct?
When he changed lanes, the way that I see it in my head is he's looking back behind him to check his blind spot.
Okay.
In that situation, obviously, yes, he did see him.
And turning your head like this to change lanes, that's a lot different than actually facing straight on and looking in the car, sitting there, reaching over to grab your bag while the child's still sitting there. That's a lot different. You're actually turning around. It's a lot different than if you're looking and facing that way. You would agree with that?
I would agree that he could see more turning his head to look backwards.
Than looking straight at the car seat?
I don't know if he was looking straight at, I'm not exactly sure.
Okay.
I'm not sure how I'm supposed to know that he's looking right at the car seat, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
This is another example of Boring trying to get under her skin and score some points, but Leanna won't let him.
You would say that the life he found out he was living, I don't even know what you know exactly, but the life he was living on the side was in stark contrast to what we've seen in videos and what you saw at home. Would you agree with that?
I guess I'm not sure how to answer your question. I'm sorry. I just...
Okay.
He was, I mean, the way that he acted with me at home was not any different than the way that he acted other places.
How about when he would go see prostitutes?
I didn't know about that.
And that's what I'm saying is, you know what he actually was doing at this point. You've been told to some degree he was seeing prostitutes, he was messaging underage women and things like that. You know that now.
Right.
That is completely opposite than the defendant that you knew. Would you agree with that?
I would agree that the things that we were struggling with in our marriage were directly related to those things. We had problems related to our sexual relationship. Those things were affecting that. So I can't sit here and say that I was absolutely shocked to find out that he had gone outside of our marriage. The degree.
Would you agree with me that that's different than the way he portrayed himself to you or the way he acted at home?
I would agree that it's different, but not that it's like a whole other person.
Leanna said she's been watching some of the testimony from her home in Alabama. She has an absolute right to do so, because she is, in effect, the parent of the victim in this case.
Have you watched any of the testimony from regarding what he was sending to other people, the messages, these whisper messages and things like that?
A small portion of it.
Okay. Does that sound like the same person you were married to?
It sounds like somebody that's very lost.
Boring's questions had an edge, and I wondered how that was sitting with the jury. Before court broke for the day, Boring brought her to tears. He noted that she waited until early this year before she finally filed for divorce.
Are you saying that You didn't learn until right before you filed for divorce that he was actually carrying on actual relationships with other women?
I had a lot to process
Yes,
in a
ma'am.
very, very short period of time.
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember exactly when I learned what had happened.
Leanna came to Brunswick with her mom and Angie Bond, her best friend from high school. They all testified last week. When Bond later took the stand, Kilgore asked her to tell the jury how Leanna reacted when she finished her first day of testimony.
As soon as she walked in the room where we were sitting, she absolutely fell apart. She was inconsolable, sobbing. I held her. She was rocking back and forth. We had to sit in there for about 30 minutes before we could even leave because we could not get her to stop crying. We could not get her to calm down.
Well, the following morning, Boring's approach to Leanna had changed. He was more deferential. His tone had lost its hostile edge. The prosecutor started out by getting Leanna to concede that her actions at the daycare and at the police station that night were odd. He also quizzed her on how often she'd been meeting with the defense attorneys, and he noted that she refused to talk to the prosecution. I gotta say, I don't find that surprising since they'd initially branded her a suspect. At one point, when Leanna gave him an answer he didn't want to hear, Boring asked her if she'd been prepped for the question. She said she hadn't. I found this line of questioning curious, as if the prosecution doesn't do the same thing with its own witnesses. All good lawyers do this. Obviously, the prosecution did a good job prepping lead detective Phil Stoddard. He did a lot better than most people expected. Later, Boring asked Leanna a series of intensely personal questions. They clearly humiliated and frustrated her. He framed the questions by telling her he wants to know what Harris didn't tell her when they were together in the police interrogation room.
He didn't tell you that day that he'd been messaging women and things like that up until 1 a.m. on June 18th, did he?
No.
Okay. He didn't tell you he messaged another male at 12:51 a.m. about sexual topics, did he?
No. I don't know about any of this, and I want to be very clear.
Judge, I'm going to object. This is non-responsive.
Boring was sticking to his script. His theme throughout the trial is that most people who knew Harris, even his wife, really didn't know him at all. They didn't know he led such a double life. They didn't know what he was capable of doing. But Boring would have an awkward moment with Leanna as he tried to explain why he was asking such questions.
When you were in that room, did he ever tell you that he'd gotten up at 5:43 a.m. around then, or was awake at that point, messaging strangers?
No, he destroyed my life. I didn't know about these things.
Okay. And I'm sorry we have to ask you these questions, but you understand why we're having to do this, right? I mean, let me ask you this. You talked about your discussions and things like that with him and your problems on direct. You talked a lot about what you knew and what you didn't know. So unfortunately, I have to explore that to see what you did and didn't know, okay? So I'm sorry for having to ask you these questions, but I have to do it, okay?
So, here the questions come.
Did he ever tell you, or were you aware he was actually Skyping with other women on video back then during this time, both before and after Cooper?
No, I was not.
Okay. Also, were you aware he was using Craigslist during this time, both before Cooper, after, and up to that point, to try to, I guess, set up sexual meetings with men and women?
No, I did not.
You had no idea how his behaviors were escalating over the years, correct, as far as what he was doing with other people and things like that? You had no idea, correct?
I had no idea. I did not know.
Okay. And you would agree that that was somebody completely different than the person you married?
I would agree that that was a part of his personality that he did not share with me.
Kilgore got up for a few more questions on redirect. Leanna told the jury she now lives in northern Alabama.
Do you mind telling everybody why you moved up there?
I moved up there to be close to my new boyfriend.
Okay. How do you feel about your ex-husband?
He ruined my life. He destroyed my life. I'm humiliated. I may never trust anybody again the way that I did. If I never see him again after this day, that's fine.
That's all I've got.
Nothing further, Judge.
Atlanta lawyer Lawrence Zimmerman, who represents Leanna, watched her testimony in Brunswick. He said he was surprised how the prosecution treated his client.
The state of Georgia, when Leanna first testified, the first days, over 2 days, they were very rough on her and didn't treat her like a victim of a mother of a victim who's deceased. They treat her more like just a normal defense witness. And I noticed they readjusted over the night and they realized that they weren't treating her how they normally treat a parent of a victim, and so they were much more gentle today. Yesterday they wouldn't let her explain her answers. They were being a little condescending, and someone must have said something to the prosecutor overnight, say, hey, this is the parent of your victim, so you gotta treat her some respect and treat her a little bit better. So I noticed they changed her tune, because I was very surprised that they would come at her the way they did.
Zimmerman said he understood what the prosecution was trying to accomplish during its cross-examination, but he didn't agree with it.
I know what they're trying to get. I don't see that really working. They're trying to say, well, you didn't know he was a bad husband, so therefore he must not have been a good father. You could have missed that as well. I don't know why the state felt the need to ask her about the prostitutes and all that. It sort of seemed out of bounds. I don't think they needed to do that. They could argue that in closing that she didn't know about that. Quite honestly, it made her more emotional in front of the jury. I don't think that helped the state, whether he's convicted or not. It's not something I would do with a witness.
I need now to jump ahead to Friday, actually to the last witness to testify before the jury. He was the state's only rebuttal witness, called after the defense rested. Cobb County Police Detective Edward Stockinger was the man who tasked with giving Leanna the so-called death notification. He was the one who called her at Ross's office, told her to stay put so he could come talk to her. Of course, by the time Stockinger got there, Leanna already knew what had happened. Stockinger recorded his conversation with Leanna, and, through him, the prosecution played the audio of it to the jury. I guess they thought it would support their long-stated contention that Leanna showed no emotion about her only child's death. On the stand, Stockinger testified Leanna shed not a tear, and maybe he was right, but there are times during the taped interview where Leanna sounds as if she's in shock, and you can hear her voice breaking. After Stockinger tells her Cooper's dead, he starts asking her a series of questions. He doesn't tell her how her son died, so it's Leanna who has to ask him.
Are you going to tell me what happened?
All I know right now is that he went to work this morning. I guess he said he got to work around sometime after 9 this morning. And he left work, I guess probably when he called you around 4 o'clock, 4:15, and realized that he never dropped Cooper off. So Cooper was in the car all day.
Leanna sees that her mother is calling, and Stockinger lets her answer. She tells her mom the awful news, and at one point, her hysterical mom asks Leanna why she isn't showing much emotion.
I'm not processing this right now, okay? So that's why I don't have a reaction, because I don't know what my reaction will be. This does not feel like it's happening. This can't be happening.
Then, as he did several times, Stockinger told Leanna this.
I know you're still in shock. Are you with me on all of this right now? You gonna be okay?
Stockinger then asked, has something like this ever happened before? Leanna says no, but she also said this.
Okay.
We talk about it a lot. That's been one of my biggest fears. It always has been.
Talk about what, accidentally leaving him in the car?
It's always been a big fear of mine. Always.
Has anything happened, though, that might have sparked you guys?
No, it's just always been a fear.
Okay.
You know, you hear about it on the news.
Mm-hmm. Okay. How is Ross with Cooper?
He's a wonderful father.
Okay. No, I just want you to know, I don't want you to get offended by any of the questions.
I'm not offended. I know why you're asking.
Okay. It's just, I know.
I just don't know how we're going to make it through this. I don't know. just don't know how you do this.
Okay, did you hear that? No emotion. Here's lead defense attorney Kilgore questioning Stockinger on cross-examination.
And we can hear in that recording some whispering and some sighing and some sniffling. She was actually quite emotional when you were talking to her, wasn't she?
No, she was not.
She was faking it all for you, wasn't she? Is that what was going on?
I couldn't tell you what she was doing. I can tell you that I am 100% she was not emotional.
I'll leave it up to you to decide. And of course, I wonder what the jury must have been thinking. After Leanna finished her testimony Tuesday, Harris's defense team called former co-workers, church friends, and family members to the stand.
My name's Michael Bajents. Ross is my brother.
That's Harris's half-brother. He's been in law enforcement for 2 decades. He's now a sergeant for the City of Tuscaloosa Police Department. Bajents testified that he and his family often visited with Ross, Leanna, and Cooper. So, Kilgore asked him about his brother's relationship with his son.
I think he loved Cooper more than life itself. I'll never believe anything else other than he loved his son more than anything. He was very attentive. I mean, that was his little buddy.
Bajents said he and his brother were planning to take their families on a cruise in the fall of 2014. Here's another exchange with Kilgore.
You love your brother, don't you?
I do.
You're not going to lie for him, are you?
I am not.
You've been made aware of a lot of things that he's done.
I have been.
Are you ashamed of him?
I'm very ashamed of the things that he has done.
Lead prosecutor Boring wasn't going to let Bajents get off the witness stand without getting into his primary theme, that Harris was living a double life and that no one truly knew his dark side.
Is there anything about what you knew about your brother that would have led you to expect he would be going to see prostitutes when Leanna was asking him to come home and spend time with her and Cooper?
Absolutely not.
So that is a different side than you would have expected, correct?
It was shocking to me.
Okay. And you thought you knew him?
Well, I do know him.
Okay.
I just don't think that anybody would share that with their brother.
Boring had clearly prepared for Bajents to take the stand.
As a law enforcement officer, a lot of times in your job, you come across people who portray themselves in one light, or somebody you think is a great person, yet they still commit horrible acts. You would agree with that?
Sometimes, yes.
Also, Boring said, being in law enforcement, you know that it's sometimes the last person you'd expect who's the one who violates a child or commits a crime.
That's true.
The defense also called Billy Kirkpatrick, Harris's best friend. He runs an AIDS outreach program in Alabama. His church has a group that deals directly with men engaging in risky or extramarital sexual behavior. Kirkpatrick also became one of the first witnesses to say he knew about some of Harris's demons.
You know, as close as we were, there are things that I'm going to know about. You know, certain issues that I'm going to know about in his life.
In 2010, he became aware that Harris was, in the very least, looking at porn on the internet. He said he was the one who agreed to become the Covenant Eyes accountability partner for his friend. Here's Kirkpatrick explaining how that worked out.
We did that for a few years, and then, you know, as often happens, I guess he moved and as my life was changing, you know, I wasn't very consistent with that in terms of being a good accountability partner.
Then, in 2013, around the time Leanna busted him again, Harris asked his best friend if he'd pick back up where he left off. Kirkpatrick said he was extremely proud of Harris for reaching out to him. Anytime you're struggling, call or text me and we can pray together, Kirkpatrick said.
This didn't work for Ross, did it?
No, sir. I didn't know the specifics, but when the Covenant Eyes sends me the report, there were sites such as, you know, Adult Friend Finder, Ashley Madison, and Adult Sex Finder.
Okay.
So, you know, I never addressed those as I should have with him, but I had some inkling of that, yes, sir.
Kirkpatrick admitted he should have taken more decisive action. I also gotta say, what a terrible position to be in.
For my part, that was my responsibility, and I dropped the ball.
Right.
He is responsible for his actions, but if I take on the responsibility and the commitment to be his Covenant Eyes partner, then I should have done a better job. I think my issue was, at that point, I feel like I was ruining the marriage of my best friend.
During his cross of Kirkpatrick, who seemed genuinely ashamed for not doing more, Boring surprised me. His tone was angry and accusatory. Here are a few exchanges, with Kirkpatrick ultimately standing up to the prosecutor. That's when Boring, once again, suggests that a defense witness was coached into giving answers.
You would agree that the Ross Harris you knew is not a person who would be doing those type of things, correct?
I wouldn't say that either. I can't peg him with a broad stroke. I can tell you this. I saw him struggle with sexual sin. The same time I saw him being a tremendous friend to me and a tremendous father.
And a tremendous husband too, right?
At times, yes. Obviously not always, but there were times, yes. He was very loving and very sacrificial for his wife.
And how often have you met with the defense on this case, and how long did y'all prep for your answers here today?
Met with him a few times.
And
but my answers are my answers. I want to be clear on that.
One of the final defense witnesses was Gene Brewer. He's a psychology professor at Arizona State University. He's also an expert on memory and attention. We've talked about this in previous episodes before the start of the trial. I interviewed memory experts who've explained the unthinkable, how perfectly good parents could possibly forget their children were in the car. Brewer cited 3 possible factors in Harris's case: habit, or deviating from a regular routine, distractions, and fatigue. These factors can compromise what Brewer called prospective memory. Here's how he defined that.
How do you rely on past information to think about the future? How do you plan the future? And when the future arrives, how do you remember to do what it was that you were planning to do?
Here, Brewer makes the point that the defense called him to the stand to make.
Well, our systems are prone to error. And even under the best situations and the best circumstances, there's still going to be failures. And even in cases as tragic as this one, it's still something that happens. There's nothing unique about this case relative to the other cases where this has happened.
And Brewer said there are scenarios where a parent could forget something as important as this in a flash.
I think that this type of memory failure can happen on the order of seconds.
In Harris's case, Brewer said there appeared to be a break in his routine on the morning he left Cooper in the car.
He would generally take his son to the Little Apron Academy, then he would go to Chick-fil-A, then he would go to work. And so that's a well-worn path. You know, when I'm on this road, this is naturally the way that I go. When Cooper and Ross are at Chick-fil-A, now he has some type of intention that is a little bit different from his routine. But it also shares quite a few elements with his routine as well. And so when he's pulling out of Chick-fil-A and he's going to do this U-turn, under the assumption that he had a memory failure, of course, somewhere around this U-turn and pulling up to this light at Paces Ferry Road is when he presumably forgot. It happened rapidly.
As for distractions, Brewer said he'd driven the route twice and watched police videos of it. That U-turn you have to make after leaving Chick-fil-A requires a lot of attention, he said.
It's a high-traffic area, and there's lots of information there that could be distracting, and in fact, demands concentration. The traffic is not reliable. It demands focus. There's cars coming, and they're coming pretty quick. There's cars coming out of Home Depot, and as soon as that U-turn's made, if a person is planning to cross Paces Ferry, they have to go across this road, and that happens pretty quickly.
Still, lead prosecutor Boring scored some points during his cross-examination.
You would agree that if it were proven the defendant intended to kill this child, the stuff that you told the jury really doesn't have anything to do with it, correct?
No, it wouldn't have anything to do with it.
You'd said on direct that there is nothing unique about this case as compared to the other cases you've seen. Okay. Now, have you ever encountered a case or known about a case where the person who left the child in the car was sexting other women and men the night before?
No. Not
Have you ever had a case where they were sexting other women and men the morning of, leading up to it?
Well, I've never worked on any of these cases, but I'm not aware of any. No.
Are you familiar with any other case where the parent has gone back into the car and thrown light bulbs into the car in the middle of the day?
No, I'm not familiar with a parent throwing light bulbs into a car in the middle of the day.
Here's a very interesting exchange at the end of Brewer's testimony. We haven't talked much about criminal negligence during the trial. That's because the prosecution has been hell-bent on trying to prove Harris intentionally killed his son, with malice. But they're certainly going to argue for criminal negligence. One felony murder count accuses Harris of causing a death by committing cruelty to children through criminal negligence. In other words, his negligent act led to Cooper's death. It's completely at odds with the malice murder charge. It means Harris didn't intend to kill his son, but he was so negligent that he's still guilty of murder. Here's Boring attempting to try to use Brewer as a way to give jurors the option of finding Harris guilty of felony murder through criminal negligence. But Brewer wasn't willing to play along.
Also, you talk about memory failures and things like that. Some of these memory failures, just assuming this was a memory failure, that can be self-inflicted by your own behaviors, right? Your own negligent acts. Would you agree with that?
No, I wouldn't agree with that statement. I don't think that anybody is being negligent or self-inflicting any kind of thing on themselves.
So if they're making themselves tired by randomly messaging women at all hours of the night and not being awake enough to take care of your kid, you don't think that that's a self-inflicted wound right there?
I don't think that that's a very accurate characterization of what's going on here.
Okay. The lack of sleep we got for those last 3 days you were talking about, if he was lacking sleep, it was because he was up messaging random women at all hours and men at all hours of the night.
And working on his work.
The one email you saw.
And you said that he was trying to search for passports for his son.
Mm-hmm.
And you said that he was being a bad parent, but he went to Chick-fil-A with his son rather than dropping him off at the, I guess that's why I'm just a little bit confused about what it is that you're driving at.
You would agree that if he was fatigued from all that messaging at all hours of the night, that was something he chose to do, correct?
I would say sensibly that he chose to text. He chose to work. He chose to engage in activities. He didn't choose to be tired. He didn't choose to be negligent, under the assumption that there's a memory failure, of course. He didn't choose to do any of this. I think that that's an...
He didn't make the decision to stay up late doing that stuff?
He absolutely made the decision to stay up late doing that stuff, but that doesn't mean that he reflected on the consequences of it. And certainly, who would ever, under the assumption of a memory error, who would ever assume that something this bad could happen?
Were you aware of just how aware he was of the dangers of leaving a child in a car?
Yes, I am aware of that, actually. I think most parents are.
Even though Brewer seemed to score a point or two here, I'm telling you, this felony murder criminal negligence count, it's one that Harris ought to be truly, truly worried about. And felony murder, like malice murder, carries a life sentence. And really, Harris rightly should be worried about all 8 charges he's facing. The prosecution team has seemed to spare little expense in support of its case. There's a mountain of circumstantial evidence against Harris. And, from start to finish, they've carried the attitude that there is no doubt Harris did what they said he did. It's been a sight to see, and I expect we'll hear a very strong closing argument in support of the prosecution's case. By as early as this Monday afternoon, the jury will have the case. As for a possible verdict on Election Day, it better come early. The jurors are being given the afternoon off to go cast their ballots. I've covered this trial from the start with my colleague, Christian Boone. Now we're at this point, I thought it'd be good to ask him for his impressions, now that the evidence is closed. What did the prosecution accomplish?
They came in without any smoking gun. They presented a collection of moments that do not reflect well on Ross Harris. Whether they added up to him intentionally leaving his son in the car is a different matter. But I don't even know if they ever thought that they did have that case. I've talked to some attorneys who said that he was charged in that way because they knew the jurors might look at felony murder as a compromise. One thing you got to say about the prosecution is they were committed to their argument from the beginning. That from the opening statement, they said that Ross Harris led a double life and that no one really knew him, and they did not deviate from that at all.
As for the defense?
I think Leanna, the ex-wife, was a very strong testimony for the defense. I think the fact that she got off the stand and said, "I never want to see you again," even bolstered what she had to say the day before when she testified that she did not believe he did this intentionally.
How difficult a decision will this be for the jury?
I think we'll see a felony murder charge, just because I think that's something they can agree on. I think they'll probably want to punish him. The malice is going to be tough. I don't know how you could say that he did this intentionally. There's a lot of things that don't look good that may make you think that he did, but are you convinced that he did? I'm not sure anybody's going to be convinced of that. If they vote for felony murder, he could still get life in prison just like he would for the malice. So really, it's not going to make a difference to Ross Harris if he's convicted of either of those murder charges.
Next, on Breakdown, we'll hear closing arguments by the prosecution and the defense, and hopefully, we will finally have a verdict.
Do you understand, first of all, that you have a right to remain silent and you have no obligation whatsoever to testify in this case?
Yes, ma'am.
Do you also understand that you have a right to testify and it is personal to you and that it is an absolute right that you have?
Yes, ma'am, I do.
Do you further understand that the decision to testify or not to testify is personal to you?
Yes.
And that no one else can make it but you?
Yes, ma'am.
Have you, in your opinion, had adequate time to discuss this topic and issue with your attorneys?
Yes, ma'am, I have.
Season 2 of Breakdown, Death in a Hot Car, Mistake or Murder, is a production of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. The story is reported and told by Bill Rankin, produced by Richard Hallex. Audio production by Chris Basta of Bare Knuckles Creative. The music for Breakdown was composed and performed by Bo Emerson, Chris Nicholson, and Chris Basta. Special thanks to Bert Roten, Ross Cavett, Chris Nicholson, and Buddy Hall.